I'm talking about the film Sabina, which is subtitled Tortured for Christ, the Nazi Years. It's in 850 theaters today, tomorrow, and the next day, so November 8th through 10. Believe me, if you see this movie, you will not regret it. I'm delighted to have the director, John Grooters, with me. John, the central character of this story is Sabina Wormbrand, a woman who is, at least at the beginning of the movie, she's ambitious, she's largely a skeptic, not somebody who is a woman of faith. She's a little bit of a hedonist. And so you trace her journey to Christianity, which comes largely through the influence of her husband, a kind of brooding but interesting character, Richard Wormbrand. And then the two of them become soldiers for Christ in an incredibly tumultuous environment. Talk a little bit about the character of Sabina, because I think that she is she's one of the great characters, not just in this movie, but I think in movies.
Yeah, I totally agree. I look at her as one of the great Christian women of the 20th century, and I never met her. She and Richard ended up having a long life. I mean, they both were easily could have died in the 30s, 40s, 50s, but they actually moved into America. They were exiled and escaped, and they lived in a long, happy life. They toured together. They never owned a home. They never owned a car. They were the founders of the Voice of the Martyrs. They both died in early 2000, 2001, and so I never met them personally, but I have heard stories from many people who knew them, and she is consistently described as the most generous, thoughtful, insightful woman people have ever met. So the proof is in the pudding. Not only did they sort of star in this one moment in their lives, but if you take the evidence of their entire arc of their lives and they end happy and in love and together and in love with the Lord, it's a story that is legitimate. And you're right, she was an exceptional person. She's in Sorbonne University at a time when not many women are there. She's joking about wanting Madame Marie Curie to wish to be her. She had a lot of sort of talents, and so did Richard. You know, she meets Richard in this movie, and he was a brilliant young guy, very successful. He had a photographic memory. He spoke 14 languages. So these were sort of exceptional people. They would have been exceptional in the world of business. They could have done anything they wanted. And they were both, like you said, you know, kind of hedonistic, just about pleasure, didn't want kids, just rising up the ladder. And it was a beautiful time in Romania. 90 years ago, I mean, things were good there. And then everything changed. And their faith journey is sort of the story of the arc of this movie, but it's not only that, it's also the arc of the people they come in contact with. And one of the beautiful things is, I don't know, maybe you would know, there's not a lot of movies I can think of about married Christian women, married women who have healthy, good relationships. And that's not the point of the movie, that's just the background of it. A lot of the great missionary women were single. A lot of heroic women's stories come because they overcome the abusiveness of their husbands, but Richard and Sabina are equally yoked. And that is a beautiful thing to me, how when she comes along, she is strong. And both in Sabina and even in the previous movie, Tortured for Christ, they're a team, and you can see how he has a set of gifts and talents, she has a set of gifts and talents, and put together, here we are talking about them in 2021. Here we are still learning from them. So I think it's kind of a beautiful story of the completion of their marriage. They're 100%. She says in this movie, it says here, those who would save their lives will lose it. Those who lose their lives for his sake will find it. We believe this or we don't. And she's very matter of fact. Are we in fact so convicted that when Jesus says those who would even give their lives for my sake will find it? She actually decides, we're going to believe it. We're going to live the rest of our lives with that in mind. And so they take crazy risks. You know, they print Bibles and distribute them in a time when it's illegal to print Bibles and distribute them. They reach out and walk into the camps of the communists, and they start the underground church. And they pay a price. Like, they didn't just get away with it. She was in prison for 3 years in prison camps. He was in prison for 14 years. She didn't know if he was alive or dead. They didn't, send postcards. Just snatched off the streets, no idea. In fact, the communists came and told her that he was dead. So they went through the crucible of fire, but they emerged with such beautiful faith that they're admirable to me.
I mean, I want to talk for a moment, and without having you give it away, the kind of climactic scene of the movie where you've got this hard-bitten Romanian Nazi sympathizer, somebody who is a brute. He has killed Jews. He has actually killed, as it turns out, members of Sabina's own family. And there he is with Richard, and Sabina is asleep in the next room. And Richard says, I think in one of the great lines, he says, I'm going to prove the existence of God to you. And this guy goes, you can't do that. And I, as a viewer, I'm watching, and Debbie's watching, and we're thinking, you can't do that. And yet, within the story of the movie, you produce something that I never would have thought possible. You produce the context of an instant conversion. You produce a set of events where this guy is confronted with a simple fact and a simple human reaction, and it's so overwhelming that he converts on the spot. And something that, again, would have seemed preposterous. I mean, from a cinematic point of view, that you can't deliver that. No audience is going to believe it, but I believe it, and Debbie believes it. It was so powerfully done. Talk a little bit about that climactic scene. You do it not by anybody unfurling an apologetic proof for the existence of God. In a sense, what you do it is by demonstrating the essence of Christianity.
Well, exactly right. And I'll say this, I didn't write that as a fictional story. This is what happened. Now, we obviously have to put it into a context. I don't know if that's, the location, but they really did meet this character, Borilla. Borilla the butcher was the executioner at the Transnistria camp where hundreds of thousands of Jews were just flat out shot. They just shot them. And this is the guy that did the shooting. And her beloved mother, father, two sisters, little brother, uncle are all swept up and sent to the camp at Transnistria. And down the road, Richard actually runs into this Borilla and puts two and two together. So the pain is very legitimate. The struggle is very real. This isn't a theoretical meeting. And he does invite Borilla into their own apartment. And he plays this crazy little wager with God and says, you should be worried about God. Borilla, there is no God. What if I could prove to you there was? You can't. Well, let's do an experiment. I don't want an experiment. I'm going to wake up my wife. I'm going to tell her what you've done, and she'll fix for you the best supper she can make in this house. Borilla is just intrigued enough. That makes so little sense that he doesn't walk out the door. And my goodness, what Richard has just set his wife up for, he wouldn't do that unless he was so sure she had been transformed at the deepest levels by the Holy Spirit in her life that he could predict what she would do. And you're right, that scene isn't a scene where someone lays out the basic tenets of the atonement or theology. It's just when confronted with the radical idea of forgiveness, and it cracks him. It just cracks him in a moment. And it's fascinating in their story that this man who was the executioner of her family, becomes a trusted family friend, and then they work together. It's such an unbelievable story. It almost has to be true. And you're right. Had we made it up, I think we both would have kind of held our nose and said, no, you can't go there. But read their autobiographies. Read Sabina's book, The Pastor's Wife, or some of Richard's writings, Wormbrand. And they both independently write about it. So I think it was worth building the movie around that concept.
So guys, the
heart of the gospel is forgiveness.
Absolutely. Guys, the website is just sabinamovie.com. It's not Sabrina, it's Sabina, Sabina.
Not the witch.
Movie.com. You can watch the full trailer, look to see if it's playing in a theater near you. This is not a movie that you will regret. And as Debbie said, if you have a family member or friend who's either fallen away from their faith or just thinks the whole thing is a bunch of nonsense, I assure you that this movie will have an overwhelming emotional, at least will get them stop in their tracks and really think about it. John, thanks very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Great movie. We love seeing it.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you so much, Dinesh, and I appreciate all you guys do. So God bless.